The Continental Army, the first national army in the USA, was formed in 1775 during the American Revolutionary War. Let's learn about it. 1. Formation and early structure. The Army was created by the Second Continental Congress on June 14, 1775, after the battles of Lexington and Concord. It absorbed the New England militias that had been besieging Boston. This date is celebrated as the birthday of the U.S. Army. On June 15, 1775, George Washington was appointed Commander-in-Chief. He served without a salary throughout the war, and his task was to unify the various state militias into a cohesive national force. Initially, there were 39 infantry regiments and several artillery units. The first national recruitment, authorized by the Continental Congress in June 1775, called for 10 rifle companies, 3 from Pennsylvania, 2 from Maryland, and 1 from Virginia. During the next few years, the Army grew and changed. Here's a table showing some of the major phases of its development. 2. Demographics and composition. The Continental Army was made up of soldiers from all 13 colonies. It also included a significant number of European immigrants, including Germans, Irish, and Dutch, as well as a sizable number of African Americans. About 10% of the troops during the war were black, including a Rhode Island regiment that was 75% black. Many of these African Americans were enslaved people who had been promised freedom by their colonial masters in exchange for military service. Others were free blacks who volunteered out of a sense of patriotism or to escape economic hardship. There were also several Native American tribes who fought on the side of the Patriots. Volunteers for the Continental Army ranged in age from 12 to 70, while the official minimum age for enlistment was 16. Younger boys, such as 12-year-old Jeremiah Levering, who served as an artilleryman, were able to join up with parental consent. However, most soldiers were between the ages of 18 and 30. Soldiers in the Continental Army came from all walks of life. There were farmers, artisans, shopkeepers, laborers, and even some intellectuals. The troops were generally divided into 3 categories: officers, non-commissioned officers, and privates. Officers were typically college-educated members of the upper class, while non-commissioned officers and privates were usually drawn from the lower ranks of society. As the war dragged on and tensions between the colonies grew, soldiers from different regions sometimes found themselves fighting alongside those they had once considered to be rivals. For example, New Englanders, Southerners, and troops from the mid-Atlantic colonies often distrusted each other, reflecting the limited exposure the colonists had had to their fellow Americans before the war. 3. Training and professionalization. The training of the Continental Army was initially quite haphazard, but it was greatly improved by the arrival of the Prussian officer Baron Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben in 1778. Von Steuben drilled his troops at Valley Forge and introduced them to standardized European tactics, which he taught them using his manual, Regulations for the Order and Discipline of the Troops. He also introduced a system of merit-based promotions for non-commissioned officers. Under this system, the best soldiers, regardless of their social status, were promoted based on their skills and performance. This innovation helped to create a more professional and effective military force. For challenges and hardships. Despite their bravery and determination, the soldiers of the Continental Army faced a number of challenges and hardships throughout the war. Perhaps the most significant of these was the Army's chronic shortage of supplies. Soldiers were promised certain daily rations, such as 1 pound of meat or 1 pound of bread, but these promises were rarely kept. Another major issue was the Army's lack of pay. The annual salary of a soldier in the Continental Army was theoretically $29, but the continental currency in which the pay was issued became near worthless. As a result, soldiers often went months without being paid, and many deserted simply because they had no other means of support. In 1781, the Pennsylvania line mutinied due to a combination of low pay and high mortality. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of the Continental Army's story is the high rate of casualties. Out of the approximately 175,000 men who served in the Army during the war, 8,000 died in battle and 16,000 perished from disease and starvation. Overall, total losses, including those killed, wounded or captured, reached 30%. 5. Key campaigns and victories. Despite these challenges, the Continental Army achieved a number of important victories during the war. However, it's important to note that early on, the Continental Army suffered a number of defeats, particularly in the southern and middle colonies. They lost New York in 1776, for example, but they rallied with surprise victories at Trenton and Princeton in 1776. These victories boosted morale and helped to turn the tide of the war in favor of the Americans. Perhaps the most important victory of the war was the Battle of Saratoga in 1777. At Saratoga, Benedict Arnold and Horatio Gates forced British General John Burgoyne to surrender his entire command. This victory convinced the French government to enter into an alliance with the United States, providing the Americans with much-needed military and financial support. The war effort then shifted to the south, where British forces hoped to make headway by winning over the support of the region's wealthy planters. However, this strategy proved to be unsuccessful. Nathanael Greene used guerrilla militia tactics alongside his Continentals to great effect, wearing down Cornwallis and his men. The campaign culminated in the Battle of Cowpens in 1781, a decisive American victory that effectively ended major British operations in the South. The final and perhaps most climactic battle of the war was the Siege of Yorktown in 1781. With the help of French naval forces, American troops trapped British forces under the command of Lieutenant General Charles Cornwallis at Yorktown, Virginia. On October 19, 1781, Cornwallis surrendered his army to American and French forces. This effectively ended major fighting in the war. 6. Evolution and dissolution. As the war dragged on, the Continental Congress realized that it would need to take steps to retain the experienced troops it had been able to retain. Initially, enlistments had been for 1 year, but by 1777, the terms had been extended to 3 years or the duration of the war. This change in policy helped to ensure that the Continental Army would have a core of experienced soldiers upon which it could rely. By 1784, the army had been reduced to just 80 soldiers as the Continental Congress was wary of having a large standing army. As a result, the militia assumed the primary responsibility for local defense. Of those soldiers, 54 were reorganized into the 1st American Infantry Regiment in 1784, which is considered to be the precursor to the modern U.S. Army. The 1st Battalion, 5th Field Artillery, known as Hamilton's Own, traces its roots back to a Revolutionary War artillery unit led by Alexander Hamilton. 7. Legacy and historical impact. The legacy of the Continental Army is a testament to the perseverance and determination of the American people. George Washington's farewell orders in 1783 described the Army's survival through almost every possible suffering as a miracle. The Continental Army introduced innovations in military training and tactics that had a lasting impact on warfare. By adopting merit-based officering, the Continental Army broke away from the British practice of purchasing commissions, laying the groundwork for a more egalitarian and professional military. Additionally, the integration of militia regular force tactics proved highly effective, demonstrating the strengths of a decentralized and adaptable military strategy. Most importantly, the Continental Army embodied the principles of civilian control of the military, a cornerstone of the U.S. system of government. When George Washington resigned his commission in 1783, he chose not to seize power, but instead to return to civilian life, setting a precedent for peaceful transitions of power that has endured for centuries. The story of the Continental Army is one of courage, determination, and the pursuit of liberty. Its legacy continues to inspire and shape the United States Army today. Thank you for watching this episode. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss an exciting episode. See you next time.